So we're on page 40 of Sri Sharada Devi and Her Divine Play by Swami Chaitananda. And they've just been married. And one of the things we're going to have to remember from last week is that she was dressed in borrowed jewels because her family was very poor. And so her mother didn't want her to be shamed. And so they borrowed some jewelry so that she could look nice for the wedding. And now the wedding has happened. And it says the day after the wedding, one paragraph before that, when the ceremony was over, the bride's father was busy feeding the bridegroom's party. The feast was arranged in the courtyard of Sharada's old mud cottage and was prepared for the bridal chamber. According to tradition, the village women and bride's friends assembled in the bridal chamber to tease and joke with the bridegroom. He must have loved that. Seeing many women in that room, Ramakrishna thought of the playful Divine Mother. Immediately, he began to sing a song about the Divine Mother in his melodious voice. The women were all surprised and charmed as they gazed at the bridegroom's beaming face, and they forgot to play the practical jokes on him. Ramakrishna was completely possessed by a divine mood that night. Blessed are the women who witnessed the spiritual union of Hara and Gauri, Ramakrishna and Sharada. It was an unusual wedding. So you see, this is one of the beautiful things about someone who's genuinely and deeply spiritual, deeply in love with the divine, that they bring that with them wherever they go. There's no other option for them. So he walks in and he sees all of these women in that room, and his mind immediately goes to the playfulness of the Divine Mother, and immediately he's singing that song, and he's singing that song with so much heart and so much presence that it produces an atmosphere in the room. I've told the story about Swami Prabhupada. One of the powers that not in the sense of a literal power, maybe it was, I don't know. But one of the things that was striking about him is how he commanded the room when he walked in. Like, I remember one day, it was actually one of those days that was like a big football day. I think it was the Super Bowl was on. And so there was a whole bunch of men at the monastery for lunch that day, like 20 of them. And we were all standing around in the dining room before lunch. I was kind of bringing the food in, and everybody was just talking, and it was just a lot of, just a lot of noise, a lot of talking, a lot of chit chat. And I remember when Swami Prabhupada came down the stairs and walked into that room, didn't say a thing, didn't do anything, just walked into that room, and the atmosphere in the room changed, and it just went silent. It just went quiet in there. And, we sat down and had lunch, and that kind of bleeds into his secondary power that I used to appreciate, was his ability in just one sentence or two, without anybody knowing, he could bring a conversation that had kind of strayed into, worldly things. In just one or two sentences, he could bring that subject right back to the divine, without offending anybody, without anybody even realizing what he had done. And, this is why I think that Thakur stresses so much in spiritual life and says one of the most important things for us is this deep sincerity and earnestness in our practice. That we just really invest the heart, invest love into the practice. And I mentioned, I guess, a while back about how exactly do we invest love? I was playing with this idea lately of changing my American idea that time is money, changing that to time is love, so that you don't invest in here's the reason I did it, for a very practical reason, that the idea of time is money was very bothersome to me, because I've been doing art lately. We'll brush past that real quick, but I've been doing art lately. And, I gave, we had an open studio at Greg's studio. And so we put our things up for sale there. And I just kind of, you have to put a price on things. And I won't do it, actually. Just thankfully, the other artists there covered that for me and fixed my pricing. But, I thought that's the problem. In the olden days, they built these beautiful things, and not even that olden. I mean, you can just go back to the 1950s and look at the custom houses in an older neighborhood and just see the detail. And there's just a different level of attention paid to those things. And I thought, why isn't it like that? And I thought, well, because of this idea that time is money, that, if I make a piece of art and I really enjoy making it and I'm spending all that time working on it, and all I'm doing is a little tiny square tile, by the time I'm finished with that, if I live my life as time is money, I'll have to ask some exorbitant amount of money for this little tiny tile that is going to be quite challenging for. And I thought, well, that's I don't want that to be the case. I just don't want to live that way. And so I thought, well, time is love. And when you invest time into something, you're not investing money into it. You're investing your heart into it, your love into it. And I thought that's the right way. Because when I thought about it that way, I thought, well, on these tiles, on these pieces of art, I'm investing love into them. And with love, you want people to have it. It gives you joy to give that to somebody, and if they pay for it, of course, that's secondary for, hopefully, doesn't have to be, but it's secondary. The price isn't really the point. It's you've invested something into something beautiful and you're passing it on to someone else. And so this investment of ourselves in our practice manifests that way. The reason that you keep your shrine room very clean and dusted and set up nicely all the time with attention is because it's that investment in your shrine that I feel like Tucker's over there telling me, yeah, why don't you get over here and dust this shrine? But to have that sincerity and that love and that willingness to invest yourself into the life that you're living, to invest your love, which is what you are. By telling us we're Sat Chit Ananda, we're love, intelligence, wisdom, existence. And so that's what we give. That's what we have. And so when you do something, it's not the skill you're giving. Forget your set of skills. Forget your set of education. That's not the defining factor in what makes you, you. The defining factor in what makes you, you is the love that you have to invest. And I've mentioned in the past, like when you go to work, if you work in some cubicle farm somewhere and you're running into your midlife crisis, you're running into your midlife crisis in a cubicle farm because you've mistaken the cubicle farm and the type of job and the job title and the salary as being the point of that work. And that's never going to mean anything to anybody at a heart level, at a fulfilling level inside. So you have to understand that whatever your job is, what you have to give is your love and your wisdom and yourself. That's what you have to give. Incidentally, you're an accountant. Incidentally, you're a doctor. Incidentally, you're a busboy. What you really are is love. And you go to the office to love and to care and to nurture. And I promise you, if you are successful in cultivating that ideal for yourself, your job will be fulfilling. It will become your favorite place to be, because that's what we are. That's what makes life beautiful. That's what makes life deep. And so we see this in Thakur everywhere he goes, and in the Divine Mother, in the description of her as she was growing up, even as a young girl, how helpful she was to everybody in the community, and how kind she was, and how gentle she was. Not because she was just that type of person, but because she was a person and she knew what that meant. She knew that she was a manifestation of love, a manifestation of wisdom, and that the isness was the opportunity to dance that existence. And so here we see Thakur living that way and making that kind of impact on this wedding day. The day after the wedding, Ramakrishna returned to Kamarpukur with Sharada, but as she was so young, her uncle Ishwar accompanied her and carried her on his shoulders. Chandramani welcomed the new bride with due ceremony and arranged a small feast for friends and family members. Sharada later recalled, "I was married when the dates ripened. I don't remember the month. During my 10-day stay there, I would pick up ripe dates from the ground. One day, Dharmadas Laha, the village landlord, came and seeing me asked, "Oh, is this the newly married girl?" So you run into a statement like that. It's fascinating. We had a young man join the monastery in D.C., Kumar, and he didn't know when he was born. He didn't know how old he was. The whole town was like that. He said nobody knew what their birthdays were, because that wasn't the point. So he generally knew what time of year, because he knew, just like Sri Sharada here, I was married when the dates were ripe, and so he was kind of like that. But I like to think about things like that, because age is one of the things we really attach to as an identity, right? And when I hit 30, when I passed 30, I was like, oh my God, I'm 30 years old. I thought that was old. I didn't know how old you could really get. But I passed 30. But imagine if you were like Kumar and you didn't know how old you were. You didn't know what year you were born. You didn't know when your birthday was. You would not identify yourself by your age. You wouldn't suddenly be a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old. You're just you, right? And I thought, what a wonderful freedom he was given by the Divine Mother to not know his birthday, to not know his age. And, it really opened my eyes to how I've measured my life by a false measure, something that has nothing to do with me. I'm ever free, ever pure, and immortal. What am I measuring my life in years for? That's going to be a huge number, if it's not already a huge number. But I guess in the real sense, we don't know our own birthday if we've never been born. Swami Prabhupada used to joke. We used to laugh at the dinner table occasionally when that idea would come up. He was always marveled. The first things we usually hear when you're starting out in Vedanta is that you've never been born and you never die. And then the first question that everybody wants to ask when they become a Vedantan is, what happens when we die? We get stuck in these things. But see, think about these things. Think about what you measure yourself by and what you measure your life by. Because one of them, doing it the right way will give you a beautiful life. And one doing it the wrong way will cause a lot of bitterness and a lot of feeling like there's not enough meaning in your life. So if there's not enough meaning, you're not living for love. And if you're growing bitter, take Mother to the office, take the divine with you wherever you go, and let that relationship, that internal relationship, sweeten your life, sweeten your day, inspire you in the morning. I used to have a bunk bed in the monastery in Hollywood, and the beams on the ceiling, if I wasn't careful when I sat up on the top bunk, I would hit my head on the beams in the morning. And so I decided to take care of that and put a scripture up there on a little index card that was taped right there so I could read it, and I would make a point of reading. That was my affirmation for the day. I'm ever free, ever pure, ever loved by the divine. And so I'd wake up, and instead of hitting my head, I would find the note with the scripture written on it. And so center your life around this idea. Don't let the events of a day change you. You're beyond the events of your day. Chandramani was anxious when the time came to return the borrowed jewelry to its owners. She had affectionately made the new bride her own, and now she would have to take the jewelry away. This thought filled the old woman's eyes with tears. Although she did not express her sorrow, it did not take long for Ramakrishna to perceive it. He consoled his mother, and then, while Sharada was sleeping, he himself took the jewelry away so deftly that she was unaware of it. The jewelry was immediately sent to the Lahas, but when the intelligent girl awoke, she asked, "Where is my jewelry?" Chandramani took Sharada on her lap and consoled her, saying, "My darling, later Ramakrishna will give you much better jewels than those." The matter did not end there. Sharada's uncle Ishwar came to see her that day. When he learned of this incident, he was offended and took Sharada back to Jairambati at once. Chandramani was terribly hurt. To ease her pain, Ramakrishna said playfully, "Whatever they say or do, they can't annul the marriage now." You see his general disposition. You see how positive he was in all of these situations. Walking in, immediately seeing the room full of women and thinking of the Divine Mother's play, her playfulness, and singing a song about her playfulness. And then, about the wedding, even when the wedding and everybody's looking for someone to marry him and couldn't find anybody who wanted to marry a crazy sadhu. And then he tells them, "Oh, why are you looking everywhere? She's in the next town over. Her name's Sharada. Go find her." Just like that. And now in these times of trouble, he just solution oriented. There's a good word. We can mix the corporate world with our spiritual life here for just a moment. Being solution oriented means you don't run or you don't walk around the world looking at the problems. Anybody can see the problems. Any new hire, any dropout, anybody can sit and see problems in things. But it's not very many people who can find a solution to things. And so always be positive minded, be solution minded. If you see a problem, acknowledge the problem, but immediately tend to the solution, tend to fixing it, tend to taking care of it. And just go around like that. Remember, I talk about quite often the peace pilgrim and how she saw herself as a servant. And she said that every moment of her life she saw as an opportunity for service. And so her spiritual practice was to be constantly scanning the world around her every moment to look for an opportunity to serve. That's what we're moving toward, that expression of ourself, because that's who we are. That's our nature. That is the wizard behind the curtain, as it were. After the marriage ceremony, Ramakrishna stayed in Kamarpukur for 1 year and 7 months. He visited Jairambati sometimes in December of 1860, when Sharada was 7 years old. When Ramakrishna arrived in Jairambati, Sharada washed his feet and fanned him and amused her friends. Sharada was extremely bashful and always tried to hide herself when in public. One day, Hriday brought some lotuses. To Sharada's great consternation, worshipped her feet with those flowers. After spending a short time in Jairambati, Ramakrishna went back to Kamarpukur, taking Sharada with him. Ramakrishna stayed in Kamarpukur for a few days, although Chandramani begged him to stay longer. He returned to Dakshineshwar and plunged once more into spiritual practice, forgetting all about his young wife. Sharada returned to Jairambati and assumed her family duties with her mother. So it's more like a betrothal at this point until she's old enough to move to Kamarpukur. So she's living with her family. And this bashfulness is something that isn't because of a shyness. It was because of a modesty. And it's an interesting thing that she says that a woman's strength is in her modesty. And that's quite a challenging teaching. Of course, I'm not a woman, obviously, but I've often, I know I always get myself in trouble if I go into this conversation, but because I'm a man, I get it. I'm no mansplaining for me about what's necessary for a woman or anything like that. But I have been confused by our society's treatment of women, because in one sense we're talking equality and opportunity and all of those things, which is a beautiful ideal. And yet at the same time, there's not a culture on the planet that exploits women more than this one does simultaneously at the same time. Totally sexualized in every picture. You very rarely see just a normal picture of a woman. Every picture has to be somehow alluring and beautiful. And, the billboards are even worse. And so when Sri Ramakrishna, when Sri Sharada comes along and I look at the divine as mother, and I look in her for a new definition of feminism, for a higher definition of feminism. And I've not been successful, and I'm blaming it on being a dude. But I've often wanted to get a group of women of Vedanta together to suss out a new ideal, a new definition of feminism that really, I think, honors the nature of woman more than the body of woman, and brings a higher ideal that kind of separates it from men altogether. This is where I get in trouble because, as an outside observer, it seems to me that we've defined the ideal woman as being able to do anything a man can do. That doesn't work at all. That's more denigrating than the problem itself, is to think in that sense of using a comparative thing, putting it into a comparative situation with men. And so here we see in Sri Sharada that this bashfulness, this modesty, let's say more than bashful, but this modesty of hers, that she didn't take advantage of body and beauty for her whatevers, but she was very, very much behind the scenes. And her power was in that. You see that as the Divine Mother, the amount of respect that she got and earned from the men around her, that they would take the dust of her feet, which was quite an amazing thing to be done, and that they honored her as the Divine Mother and went to her for advice. Vivekananda wouldn't do anything without conversing with the Divine Mother first and foremost. And Ramakrishna also, revered the Divine Mother and said, with me, you can offend me all you want, but if you offend her, God help you. There's nothing I can do for you. And so this idea of the power of Shakti and the intense respect that Ramakrishna had for that is amazing and beautiful. And to see Sri Sharada demonstrating it even at 7 years old is also quite astounding. Sharada visited Kamarpur twice more during her childhood. She later recalled, when I was 13, I went to Kamarpur. The master was then in Dakshineshwar. I stayed there for a month and then returned to Jairambati. After 5 or 6 months, I returned to Kamarpur and stayed a month and a half. I lived with my brother-in-law, Rameshwar, and my sister-in-law, Shakambhari, and others. I used to think, I'm a new bride. How shall I go to the Halderparkur and bathe myself by myself? One day I left the house by a back door and was worrying about the matter when 8 young maidens suddenly appeared, apparently from nowhere. And it's a little footnote. According to Hindu mythology, the Divine Mother of the universe has 8 maidens as attendants. So one day, here we're seeing a pretty significant event here. One day after I left the house by a back door and was worrying about the matter, when 8 young maidens suddenly appeared, apparently from nowhere. As I started for the tank, 4 of them walked in front of me and 4 of them walked behind me. Thus guarded, I walked to the water and all of us bathed together. Afterward, they brought me home. This continued every day during that visit to Kamarpur. I wondered who these girls were, but I could not figure it out. After Ramakrishna's visit to Kamarpur with the young Sharada, he did not return for nearly 6.5 years. During this period, he practiced various sadhanas, including Tantra, Vatsalya Bhava, Mathura Bhava, Vedanta, and Islam. After that strenuous spiritual journey, his health broke down and he contracted dysentery. In 1867, to recuperate and regain his health, Ramakrishna returned to Kamarpur accompanied by Hriday and his tantric guru, Bhairavi Brahmani. The family then sent the message to Sharada asking her to come to Kamarpur. She was then 14 years old. Swami Sharadananda wrote about Sharada's visit and spiritual training under Ramakrishna's guidance. As such, during this visit to Kamarpur, the master earnestly attended to a noble duty. Although he was initially indifferent to his wife's coming to Kamarpur, when she arrived to serve him, he began to educate and to train her for her well-being. Knowing that the master was married, Totapuri had once said to him, "What does it matter? He alone is firmly established in the knowledge of Brahman. Who can keep intact his renunciation?" In the knowledge of Brahman, who can keep intact his renunciation, detachment, discrimination, and self-awareness, even while living with his wife. Yeah, I like the way they describe that there, that Totapuri, the Brahmani Bhairavi, she was a woman and Ramakrishna's guru, teacher in the Advaita non-dual. And when she saw that he was married, she's like, that doesn't matter. He's so established in Brahman that he will not forget. That he will not forget what? This is a beautiful list of things here. That he'll keep intact his renunciation. That those things he has set aside as being unreal and being unworthy of spending his life on, he was established. Once he had set them aside, they weren't picked up again. I saw this in Swami Prabhutananda. I was with him for 15 years there in San Francisco. And, when I first moved in, he had a pretty varied diet, could eat a lot of different things. But as his heart condition, went on, and lots of doctors at that age and whatnot, by the time he was, close to moving on to greater things, he was eating basically a fistful of supplements that were given to him by somebody. So he was taking over 100 tablets a day for this. And I remember one time sitting at the breakfast table, every single day for breakfast, he would have a bowl of just plain oatmeal, 5 soaked almonds that had been peeled the night before, a piece of dry toast. And so I remember one morning asking him, after I'd been in the monastery making him breakfast for like 8 years. So you see what a great servant I was. I asked him after 8 years if he wanted something besides oatmeal for breakfast. It only took me 8 years to ask him that question. And I remember when I asked him, I said, "Do you want me to put anything in it, Maharaj? I can put some apples or nuts or something in there." And, he looked at me and he said something that I didn't understand at the time. He said to me, "Oh, not necessary. See, those things dropped off long ago." And I didn't know what that meant. But over the ensuing years, as I watched his diet get more and more and more and more restrictive, when the doctor said no more cheese, it was as if cheese evaporated from the planet. I never heard him say a thing about it, ask about it. When sweets had to be stopped, the sweets were gone. He just never took them. If they were brought to the table, if a devotee came and brought him sweets, he would take it and touch it to his forehead and then give it to someone else. But when he made a decision, it was finished. You could not get that. You could not get him to change his mind, no matter what. It took him a long time to commit to something. He would take his own time. Time was not the consideration. He would sit there and act only when he felt that interior movement that it was time to act or to do that. And once he started doing something, that was the matter. And Jesus talks about that same ideal. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Have that self-control, that control of your mind, that control of your body, that it obeys you. And don't be wishy-washy. If you've said that you weren't going to do it, or if you said that you were going to do it or don't, but none of this flakiness. Steer your boat. Be always aware of your nature. So he's firmly established in keeping intact his renunciation, his detachment, right? This young girl is married to him, and he didn't even go see her for a long time there. His discrimination, the discernment between the real and the unreal, right? So he held that. That was a practice. That was who he was. It was just built in. He didn't let that go. That discernment, does it change or does it not change? If it changes, it's unreal. Then just let it be unreal. Let it rise, let it fall. If it doesn't change, that's real, And what is it that's real? It's the observer within, our nature. that which has been you through all the changes of the body and mind. That unchanging you is the unchanging. It's the only thing that's real, and that is the divine. And the self-awareness, this is knowing who you are. This is important because it's easy to forget who you are these days. You can see yourself as a great sadhu, and then you'll get in an argument with somebody about politics, and you get hooked and you get bothered and you get loud and you get angry and all of that. You have forgotten your self-awareness. You have forgotten who you are, that you are not these things, that you, all of these things exist within you. And so holding on to that, never forgetting, that's why we do our mantra, the name of the beloved, to constantly remind us of that nature of love that is our own, and to grow and to nurture that constant thought of yourself as love in this world, your thought of yourself as wisdom in this world, and to not get caught into all of the other things that make us get offended, or, if we're getting offended, if we're getting annoyed, if we're getting angry, if we're getting jealousy, all of those are invitations by the Divine Mother to follow her finger, to see the boundaries of your ego. That's what she's showing you. That's why those things happen. That's why people annoy you. It's not because the person's annoying. It's because you've got a boundary in your ego where you don't embrace that person. And she's that annoying. She's using that to put her finger on the place you need to pay attention to, so that you can transcend, so that you can grow and ever expand the reach of your goodwill, the reach of your love. So the self-awareness, even while living with his wife, he alone has attained. Of course, a room full of men, I'd be laughing out loud for that. Even with his wife, he was remembering all these things. It's like, but is that not one of the big distractions? Well, it can be both. A marriage that's devoted to the divine together can be a great advantage. But, for like, some of the marriages I've seen that it's easy for the two get hooked off of each other. These old habits, these old passive aggressive conversations and whatnot, you can see them, And so even in marriage, remember who you are. Always, always, always remember who you are. Sing it every day. Vivekananda says, tell yourself every day, I am ever free. I am ever pure. I am beloved of God. I am love and bliss by nature. I am wisdom, intelligence by nature. I exist in the presence of the divine, with the presence of the divine, always. So always hold on to that. It's very important, so that you don't get hooked and life doesn't get difficult. You don't get caught up in the stories, story after story, struggling to figure out who you are and what your purpose in life is, and what is this all about. He alone has attained supreme illumination, who can always look upon man and woman alike as Atman and deal with them accordingly. This sentence right here is the solution to sexism, to racism, to nationalism, to any of these isms. It's to look in the eyes of everybody. Before you look at the body, before you look at any of the other things indicated, look in the eyes. And remember to look for the Divine Mother there, or your highest ideal. Look for Ramakrishna, look for Jesus, look for Buddha, look for the beloved in those eyes. And take that moment until you see that person, that divine behind those eyes. And then speak to Thakur, speak to Jesus, speak to Ramakrishna, speak to your highest ideal as you're speaking to that person. That will assure you that you won't get hooked into a bad situation. You won't, have to deal with all that other stuff. This is the training. If we know by nature what we are, then we know who everybody is, right? If you identify as a man, then you're going to see a woman. If you identify as rich, you're going to see poor. If you identify as handsome or beautiful, you're going to see ugly. If you identify as fat or skinny, you're going to see the opposite. right? So what do we see? We see love in each other, and we look for the good in each other and fan that flame, right? So we look for good in each other and we encourage it. We encourage it in each other. So we see that he alone has attained supreme illumination, who can always look upon man and woman alike as Atman and deal with them accordingly. So to see them as the divine and deal with them as the divine, that there's a real sweetness that will take over your conversations if you do that. If you're at the cashier and you're talking to the cashier as if she's the divine mother, you're speaking sweetly, you're speaking respectfully, you're open and available to them, and it will change your life. It will change the world you live in, actually. A person who is aware of the difference between the sexes may be a good aspirant, but that person is still far from having the knowledge of Brahman. Remembering Totapuri's words, the master now began to test the self-knowledge that he had achieved after his long sadhana, and to train his wife for her own spiritual development. The master could not neglect any action or leave it half finished if he considered it to be his duty. There's another hidden teaching right there. If something is your responsibility, you don't neglect it and you don't half do it, right? This is that investment. Time is love. You spend your time and your focus planting love, and planting love means attention, means doing something as an offering to the divine, right? So no matter how simple it is, it doesn't matter. It's not what you're doing in life that's important. It's how you're doing it. That's the secret to living. Be a busboy, be a street sweeper, be whatever. That is not the point. Your identity is already established at birth. You are Satchitananda. That's what you are for your life. And anything that you do in your life, manifest who you are through it. Right? That's how we have a fulfilling life. That's how we have a deep and satisfying life. It is that way. I talk about my friend Lalita, because it was such a beautiful realization that she had. She had that horrible stroke and was bedridden at a fairly young age, and before she had retired. And she was a powerful lawyer. Very used to being, she was Jewish also, incidentally. And I only say that because Jewish women in my mind are very strong, powerful women. And she was that way. And I got to know her. And then when she had this, after I had left San Francisco, she had this terrible stroke and had to move to Portland to stay in a home there where her brother-in-law was taking care of her. But I remember after she had been in there for like a year, I talked to her on the phone, and she was so down. She was like, why am I even alive? Why would God keep me alive where all I can do is lay in a bed all day long because I can't even roll over? And it was really difficult for her. And then one day I called, and she picked up the phone, and I knew immediately something was different, because in her voice there was that ring. There was that Lalita was present again. And I mentioned it to her, and she says, yes. She says, yes. She says, I figured it out. She says, I've been laying here for a year in self-sorrow, bemoaning all of the things that I can't do and all of the limitations, and just feeling the pain of all of that. And she said, I realized that I had completely misunderstood the situation. She said, I am still 100% who I have always been. She says, my body doesn't work anymore, but my manifestation of me is what I'm about. And she says, so I just decided that I was going to manifest me through whatever this body had to offer, whatever it was. And she said, I decided to start getting out of bed instead of just laying in the bed every day. She said, I call the nurses and I have them pick me up and put me in the wheelchair. And she says, and I go wheeling around, and I've just made it my goal to encourage everybody else on the floor. I go in, I read jokes. I try to learn a new joke every day, she said, and I go into people's rooms and I just tell my jokes and just encourage them. And she said, it has made every difference in my life, just knowing that It was so inspiring to me. I mean, this was quite a few years ago now that she had this, but I talk about it as much as I can, because what a wonderful secret to living. You are Satchitananda. You are not the body and its conditions. You are not the mind and its conditions. You are love trying to manifest as purely, and by purely we mean without any selfishness, without any thought of me and mine in it. That your duty as a divine self is to manifest your love and wisdom in this world through whatever limitations you've been given, whatever they are. Use those limitations to express your love. That's the point of life. And that's the challenge to us in living our life. It's the thing that we have to come to know and to be able to freely manifest it without a limit, without an inequality in it. So the master could not neglect any action or leave it half finished if he considered it to be his duty. The same applied to the present situation. The master came forward to thoroughly train his adolescent wife, who solely depended on him in every respect relating to both secular and spiritual matters. He taught her how to serve God, how to serve the guru and the guest, how to perform household work skillfully and to spend money discreetly, and most important, how to surrender everything to God and become expert in dealing with people according to time, place, and circumstance. We have hinted elsewhere how far-reaching this was the result of the teaching that the master imparted to her by setting the example of his ideal life endowed with unbroken chastity. It is enough to say that Sharada was fully satisfied with the master's chaste and pure love. Throughout her life, she worshipped the master as her own chosen deity and built her own life by following his example. So you see that dedication that he had to her, and of course, there's always that nervousness, that, oh my goodness, he was grooming her. She was 5, 7 years old, 13 years old, and now he's training her. But you see, that's not what he was doing, because that was never an expressed part of the marriage. It was a chaste marriage for both of their full lives. So what was he training? He was giving himself to her, sharing this love for God, these experiences with the divine that he had, that he knew, and to teach that surrender and to show her how to serve and how to take care of the devotees, because he knew one day, he even told her one day, she bemoaned the fact one time that they didn't have any children. And she was sort of bashful in saying that she wanted to have children. And he smiled to her and says, "Don't you worry. I'll give you more children than you can keep track of." And so that's where she learned that practice of everybody as her own. She saw everybody as her own child. And she took the whole world on. And wow, what a powerhouse. It was that divine Shakti that woke me up, that brought me to spiritual life. It couldn't have been done any other way, because I just from my own mental setup, I couldn't have believed grace to the extent that I could believe it when I saw God as mother, God as the divine Shakti. That was what gave me faith and gave me a belief that I could take on spiritual life, that I could give it an effort and go. And so that wonderful Shakti power that he really helped Sharada to identify and to manifest and to bring it out. The master loved his birthplace and the simple village people there. Sharada recalled the master's light-hearted mood in Kamarpukur. This is wonderful. So this is Sharada's own memory here. The master was suffering from stomach trouble. I was then quite young. Early in the morning, he would wake up and tell me, "Please cook these items for lunch." My sister-in-law, Lakshmi's mother, and I cooked accordingly. One day, there was no panchapuran, which is a combination of 5 spices for Indian cooking. So there was none of these spices, which is drastic. That's a big problem. Making Indian food with no spices is quite a challenge. One day, there was no panchapuran, in stock for my seasoning. My sister-in-law asked me to cook it without those spices. The master heard her words and said, "Ooh, how can that be? If you do not have spices in the house, get a pice worth from the village shop. It is not proper to cook a dish without the proper seasoning." I left behind the rice pudding and the gourmet dishes of Dakshineshwar temple and came here just to enjoy eggplant curry seasoned with panchphoron. And you want to deprive me of it? Oh, that can't be. Another day he said to me, "Please prepare lentil soup with 5 kinds of lentils and season it in such a way that it will make a hog grunt." All right. Thankfully, there's a footnote here. Let's find out what this hog grunting is about. The allusion is to a certain way of seasoning. Strong spices and red chili are thrown into hot oil in a deep pan, and then the soup or stew is poured into it. This gives out a pungent smell and makes noise that is heard from a distance. Ramakrishna liked this kind of seasoning. So, yeah, well, when you put, I know if you put that, what is that, asafoetida? That'll make a hog grunt. That stuff is horrible. That smells like rotten eggs. So, and those spices, you put that chili in there in the kitchen, that'll make your eyes water and can burn your nose as well. So this is hog grunting. So, but it's just not compromising. You see, that we live life to be excellent, because everything that we do is an offering, and we do it not out of fear, not because we're going to get our, God's going to come over and smudge us on the sidewalk because we didn't serve properly, but because of love, right? We time is love, life is love. We invest ourselves in the things that we do. We make them excellent, and we do whatever we can do to keep that level of expression alive. This is that not half doing things. It's being fully present. It's the practice of mindfulness, really. This moment is God. The I am is God. And to absorb yourself in the moment, in whatever you're doing, that doing is a prayer. All action comes from thought, and all thought is a prayer, right? It's all in interaction with the divine, every last bit of it. And so to come to that awareness and to do something as if it's an interaction with the moment, with the presence of God, with your beloved surrounding you, fully in you, of you, and about you. And you just let the mind become absorbed in that doing, in that moment. And when it's finished, it's offered. You give it to the mother. You hand it over and let go, so that it doesn't become a story of its own that feeds your ego. You let that story go so that you can stay present, because we let go of the past. We don't hold on to past. Ego is what is composed entirely of the past. So by holding on to the past, we're nourishing egoism, the sense of separateness, by believing in things and considering things important that aren't real. The past is not real. The past has no existence. It's a concept of mind. And so for being present, we leave out the past. And leaving out the past will naturally quell the future, because it's always our attachments, which is the past, our memories. Memories are things we didn't let them go, right? We grabbed them and tried to share our immortality with them. We put them into the mind. And so that's attachment. And those attachments color the moment and make it seem like it's not perfect, because it doesn't contain the attachments that are in the mind as it looks at the moment. So if you can let go of the past, desires also disappear in time, because it's the past that creates the desire. That memory of pizza, that memory of pleasure, that memory of whatever is what leads you to want it again. And that's all that's unfortunately, or fortunately, the only thing that sense experience can give to you is a hunger for more, which is a real tragedy in that sense. So let things go. Be present in the moment. This is where you are. You will never experience another moment but this one. And this same moment, this eternal moment, that's how you learn eternity, is by realizing that you live in a moment that has never begun and has never ended, that you live in a moment that is forever, doesn't pass. It's the same moment that Jesus walked in, that Buddha walked in, that the Divine Mother walked in. It's the same moment that was crystallized into the Bhagavad Gita, crystallized into the Upanishads. It's the same moment that gave the Bible and the Psalms and all of the great teachings of the sages. This moment that you live in now is that same moment. It has never ended or changed. It is the absolute. And so come to these understandings, come to these knowledge, these knowings of what the nature of things are, and let it soak deep, deep within you. This is where joy comes from. This is where depression gets healed. This is where the strength to go on comes from. This is where inspiration and fulfillment come from. It's from knowing these things and letting your life manifest accordingly. One morning he got up and said, "Today I shall eat this particular spinach. Please cook it for me." My sister-in-law and I collected that spinach and prepared it for him. After a few days, he said, "What a nice fix I am in. The moment I leave the bed, I speak of nothing but food. Good God, now I've lost all relish for food and shall eat whatever you cook." So there's a good husband. He himself realized, "No, I shouldn't be telling her what to make me for lunch every day. I shouldn't be ordering her around." So when he realized that, immediately, see, he just changed. It's like Brother Lawrence, in the practice of the presence of God. That's what he said. His only rule, his whole teaching was just two sentences. If I realized I wasn't doing something I should be doing, I did it. If I realized I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing, I stopped it. And that was his only rule. And that turned him into a saint. So it's a good one for us to know. And here we see Ramakrishna practicing it because of his discernment, because of his renunciation, because of his understanding of his nature. He would see clearly. And when a fault would come up, it was done. That's it. You can see the strength of his mind because he only had to do these things once. He tried on that chutter and saw that it only produced egoism in him. So immediately he took it off and never desired it again. He had a mathur fill up a whole room full of sweets for him, and he locked himself in there and ate all the sweets he wanted because he wanted to see what is the fruit of eating sweets. What's the truth of it? And he said the truth of eating sweets is sickness. That if you eat as many as you want, you'll get sick. They are not what you desire. He says, so why desire something that's going to get you sick? And so he walked away from that then as well, because he saw the nature of these things. Now, that's not to say he never ate another one in his life, but he never wasted his energy on seeking them out, on creating a desire for them. So I've lost the relish for food, and I will eat whatever you cook. Thus, Ramakrishna lost all interest in his body. Lost all interest in his body and paid no heed to it. Ordinary people marry to fulfill their legitimate desires for children, for having a companion with whom they share their happiness and misery, or for practicing garhastya dharma, that is, fulfilling the duties of a householder. The householder's life is the bedrock of society. The Mahanirvana Tantra says, householders should connect their lives with Brahman and try to realize him. Whatever actions they perform, the results should be offered to Brahman. It is edifying to reflect on the spiritual marriage of Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sharada. So here it is where he just lays it out. Whatever actions you perform as worship. The results are offered to the beloved, to the divine, to Brahman. In the same moment that produced them, in that same moment they're offered. They never become a part of your idea of self. It's your idea of self that produces all of that you do, not vice versa. And so it's a one-way door. You give of yourself in this world because you are infinite and immortal. You will never run out of love. So you can express as much of it as you like. You won't run out of it. You have an infinite amount. And so don't put false limits on it. What does that mean? That means just because the neighbor didn't invite you to their last party doesn't mean you can't invite them to yours. Go ahead and do it. Stretch out that love. You have an infinite amount. No need. It's the ego that meters it out to the deserving, quote. So we don't want to be that way. We want to be free. And so we don't hold those things, right? Because that's how we get caught. When when your best friend in high school, takes your girlfriend out. And what do you're filled with his anger, and you won't talk to your best friend. I'm not going to talk to him. But inside, you just want your friend back, but you can't do it. He doesn't deserve, he did this to me. That's not blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, that's all true. But is it the one necessary thing? No, it's not. It's not the one necessary thing. The one necessary thing is to love, to serve, to care, and to invest. And you tell them, you really hurt my feelings. That was really hard for me to take. You're my best friend. Please don't do that again. Or whatever. And you make it go. You make it go forward. You take, in the words of Jesus, he says, in as far as it has to do with you, live at peace. Right? So there's an acknowledgement in that some people you can't live at peace with because it's in them. It's not your problem. I remember I told that story of that young man that had that anger issue in the monastery, and I went and complained to Swami. And Swami looked at me and said, "What's the problem? Can't you see that's just the way he is? You don't have to invite it into yourself. Give him space to be the way he is, and you be the way that you are, and everything will be fine. You don't have to change him. He doesn't have to change for you, and vice versa. Just give him his space to be who he is." And I was like, wow, that's so true. Why am I getting perturbed every time this guy gets angry with me when it's clear to see that's just his thing. That's what he's struggling with. So why take that on? The Buddhists talk about that. Not every gift has to be received. So if somebody comes and tries to give you anger, you don't have to take it from them. You let them keep it for themselves. That non-taking of gifts. All right. The time has passed, seemingly. So next week we'll start here with another account from Sri Sharada. Is there any questions or any good stories?
Sure. I have a question.
Please, yes.
No fun stories yet, unfortunately. But maybe it's a very personal or intimate question, but when you really feel like you're really just like exhausted day to day, I mean, I don't know how to put this into elegant words, but I guess the closest thing would be like an actual like depression or just feeling like you can't do stuff. How do you pick yourself up? I mean, it feels impossible some days.
Yeah, it does. And it can be very challenging because the nature of the mind is it creates a bowl. A thought by itself is fine. But what happens is that some sort of trigger brings up a thought. We identify that thought as our own, as if it's us, as if it came from us. And it collects related thoughts. And that creates a state of mind. When those created thoughts are assumed to be yours and assumed to be true, they put you in a bowl and you can't see outside that bowl. This is a very important thing that I'm going to share because I spent a long couple of decades struggling, really suffering from severe depression that I was diagnosed with in 2008. And the practice took almost probably between 8 and 10 years for me to lose depression. But I can honestly say it's gone. It's been many months since I've had a depressive episode, and it used to be never more than 3 days, and now it's been several months. But the way that it happened is, number one, is when observe your mind. So become aware when those thoughts come in that cloud you into that negativity or convince you of that negativity. So become aware of that and understand that that belongs to the mind. So it's don't ever use the words I'm depressed. Don't use the words I'm angry. Don't use the words I'm anything. You have three things that you're allowed to say you are. I'm loving, I'm wise, and I exist. Those are the three things. Anything else that you say beyond those belongs to either body or mind or something else. And so know that when you talk about your depression, say, the mind is depressed today. Understand and get yourself really, really clear on the fact that you're not depressed. You are Satchitananda, but you are looking through a depressed mind. All right? That's the first thing. The second thing is remember it's a story. You know, remember that it's just a series of thinkings, a series of thoughts, and recognize them as such. And then take that for that inner dialogue, for that inner voice. Make sure that it's obeying the rules of love. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 8, I encourage any person who struggles with this to read that. It's a description of love. Love is perfect. Love is kind. You know, love is not self-seeking. It doesn't rejoice in wrong. Love never fails. Love always hopes. You know, it gives this beautiful description. And what I did with that was that I made sure that my inner voice obeyed those descriptions, because I thought to myself, when I have this inner dialogue, when my mind is speaking, who is it speaking to? It's speaking to the divine. And so I should make sure that it speaks respectfully to me, to the divine in me. I should make sure that it speaks kindly to me, that it's always encouraging to me, that it's not picking out my faults all the time, that it's not bringing up my worst points all the time. So I demanded, and it took quite some time for me to retrain my inner mind, not to call me a moron, not to ever say, oh, you idiot, God, you're always doing this crap, you know. I used to talk to myself that way. And when I realized that that was terribly offensive, because I was addressing the divine nature in me that way. And I would never do that to Ramakrishna or Jesus or Buddha or anybody else, you know. And so change your inner dialogue, change the way that you speak with yourself, and then reiterate the truth. I am pure love. I am wise. I am existence absolute, ever free. You know, I've never been born. I've never died. Vivekananda says these things in many of his lectures. He says this should be repeated to yourself all the time, that you remember who you are. And stop the stories. So when you hear, when something comes up and you feel that clench inside, that depression, that cloud come over you, stop, freeze at that moment and walk around your mind and become aware of what caused that. Become aware of what you just thought. What story did you just play that you believed, that you adopted as an identity, that your mind then took on a state of being? Because those states that the mind creates are the thing that we have to be careful about, because that's where the ego acts from. It creates a state and responds to it. So it convinces you that you want to have sex, or it convinces you that you need a drink, or it convinces you that you have no friends, or it convinces you that you're always a failure. And then you own that. You become identified with it, and it becomes your truth. So we just change the story. Give yourself permission, and this is the hard thing. Give yourself permission to not be depressed. That sounds crazy, but I'm telling you that depression only stays active because it serves something in you. Something in you is being served by being depressed. And you have to figure out what twist that is in time. It'll come undone with attention, so don't force anything, but become aware of it and watch it and see what story is causing it, and give yourself permission to let go, and to find your identity in the silence of the moment and not in the thoughts of the moment. Because in the silence is when you become aware of your nature as love. and your nature of wisdom, like that. And give yourself time. Be very kind and very patient with yourself. It takes a long time to overcome these deeper samskaras, these old habits that have been going on for we don't know how long. This life, the previous 10 lives. So be always very kind to yourself. Be very patient with yourself, but be very, very, very alert. Be very, very alert and watch your mind always. Start to understand how it works, and make sure and understand that it's yours. And you tell it what it is. You don't let it tell you what you are. And I did that practice for a while where it was like, why can't I be happy just for the sake of being happy? Why does my mind always demand a reason to be happy? I don't have to have a reason to be happy. My nature is bliss. Of course I'm happy. So you give yourself permission to break the rules of the mind, right? Don't let the mind tell you like it is. You tell the mind like it is. And in time, the mind will yield. In time, it'll break down and start listening because you're the master. The mind is not the master. You are the master. You determine these things. And it'll take you a while because you have to rebuild that self-confidence. You have to rebuild that self-image. You have to understand your relationship with this imagined world and go forward in it. There's a great bliss in there that's already yours. It's just yours to find, to become aware of it in yourself. Because the bliss of life, the wisdom of life, that which you are, is unchanging and constant. So it doesn't make any noise in you to get your attention. The attention, the way that it gets observed, it can't be observed actually, but the way that we become aware of this is through silencing everything else. So we silence the mind, we become aware of this underlying love that's always present, this underlying contentment that needs nothing, that's always present. But it can't overpower the noise of thinking, the noise of the senses. So you have to separate yourself out from the noise of the mind and the noise of the senses. And in the ensuing silence, you become aware of a deeper, more beautiful you that has always been there. And then you just learn to let that out, learn to let that pour into the mind and pour into the body and then out into the world. So that's the long story of it. The short story is if you're feeling depressed, do something for somebody. That's the best way. If you're just in that mood and you're just like, God, I don't feel like doing anything at all, then go to the kitchen. If you live in a city and there's homeless folks around, go to the kitchen, make a sandwich, put it in a bag with an apple and some potato chips and a nice drink, and go out and find someone to give that to, or walk down the street and find some old woman that doesn't have anybody to mow her lawn and just go mow her lawn. Or just take a walk around the block and pick up trash, or write an encouragement note to your friends, or just call your mother and tell her you love her. Anytime that a thought of tamas, a thought of inertia or sadness or depression or downness, anytime any of that comes, Vivekananda says the antidote is rajas, action. And so get out and go do something that counters that negative feeling, So if you're feeling down, serve. That's the best way to not to just simply don't allow yourself to stew in it. The ego loves to do that because it strengthens the ego. Even, even negative things can strengthen the ego because it can identify with them. I'm a depressed person, right? I'm a bad person, or I can't meditate, or, I'm terrible at spiritual life. I've got so far to go. I'll never realize God. All these negative things that the ego enjoys because the ego knows you're going to need a solution, and the ego is going to be that solution. I can do this. I'll take you through this, or whatever it is. Don't let that happen. You define who you are. You define what you do and how you think. But it takes practice. but you will overcome it because it's what you are. So ultimately you win. There's no way to lose in the long run. So hold on to that's a lot of stuff. And I just kept going because it's an important topic. And because I know how horrible that experience can be. And so, but no, you can do it, and you will do it. It's your nature. All right.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. Wonderful. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur. So I'll see everybody
Tomorrow.
tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow afternoon. So very good. All
Thank
right.
you,
then.
Swami.
Thank you so much.
Certainly. All right. Be well. Jai Ma.
Jai Ma.
Thank